hello. Welcome again to FAIRtax Power Radio. I'm Bob Paxton.
I'm Bob Scarborough.
And we are the FAIRtax Guys. How do you like my new The FAIRtax is Out of This World background?
I love it, man. You're interstellar, interplanetary, as they say. Watch out for that meteorite coming to your head there on the left.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I like to mess with these virtual backgrounds. There are a few of them, and this is one I hadn't used yet, I don't think. So I hope they're not too much of a distraction, but I think they're fun.
I think I'm going to try a different one next week just to see if there's something out there. I was thinking, about my backyard, a big pile of dirt or something.
A big pile of dirt. Oh, I like this one. I like, of course, the beach, the Alaska glacier. I got my steam locomotives and all that. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. Well, how you coming along now?
With what?
Well, I say you've been so busy lately. You've hardly had time to talk with us.
So, I mean, I'm passing myself in the hallway. I'm so busy here at the state. This hallway is here. You got to get out of the front door to let somebody else go by. But no, it's been good. Yeah, we're changing the shifts around a little bit temporarily, but so far so good. It really has. Yeah, it's working good. I'm looking forward to getting home today primarily because tomorrow I get to mow my yard for the first time in the season, which means I'll be busy every Saturday from here till about the end of September.
All right.
So spring is sprung, as they say.
Okay, let's start the program with a bit of a news flash. I don't know if you've heard this or not, but you know that Americans for Fair and Taxation maintains an advisory board that is different from the actual governing board. We went through it a few episodes ago. Mike Huckabee's the chair of it. Well, economist Stephen Moore, who you see on TV a lot, has joined the FAIRtax Advisory Board. So we got a heavy-duty economist who thinks the FAIRtax is great, and your audio is dropping out. I'm not sure what we can do about it, but there we go.
I'm wondering now if it just give me a second to. Can you hear me now?
Oh yes. Okay, that's better.
Okay, well we'll work on that. I'll bring it up a little bit of the volume up. We did some changes in the studio here, not much. Same old, here, but here there's some different things going on. So
okay. Well, I thought that was exciting news that the economist of Stephen Moore's stature has joined the FAIRtax Advisory Board now. So again, the advisory board does not have any governing power within AFFT. They're really, well, I don't want to say celebrity endorsers. A lot of times celebrity endorsements are just up to the highest bidder, but these guys are on the advisory board because they really do believe in the FAIRtax and want to see it move forward. But it's exciting to see Stephen Moore on board with us.
It's not just a status deal, really, but it does give credibility beyond just the group of volunteers that have been slogging away for years and years, like you and everyone else in AFFT. And I think that folks then will say, well, you know what, this might not be a bad thing. And it's been months since since the bringing of HR 25 as a promissory from the Speaker of the House to bring it to the floor for debate this year. So a lot of folks have had time you get over that initial pow, and everybody's going, wow. And now folks are really starting to sit down and consider, well, this is something that really could bring itself up and on a set of legs that could really get things moving along. And as folks consider it, and this is for people like you and me who work hard every day to promote it, that folks are going to say, hey, well, this really is something. And I think it's encouraging. And thank you, Stephen Moore, for being a part, and also to Mike Huckabee, who's been a longtime supporter of the FAIRtax, to take the opportunity to lend some credibility, some heavy names to our cause.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you what, we've been talking for the past several episodes here on FAIRtax Power Radio about the FAIRtax is good for, and we talk looking mostly at the demographic or socioeconomic groups. We're going to change that up a little bit today, that the FAIRtax is good for the economy. And so as we hit on that a while back when we were doing the rest of the story, because the FAIRtax is good for the economy is certainly nothing you're ever going to hear in the mainstream media. But we're going to go through that. But first, can I do a little digging here? I'll tell you, I really enjoy this. 99.99% of the population have no clue what the Congress critters are doing to the tax code. And I find it somewhat fascinating just to dig in here on congress.gov and see exactly what they're up to, even though a lot of times we don't have the exact text and we just kind of have to go by the descriptions. But remember, Ron used to fuss at me, said I take too much time in this segment, you know.
It underscores the lunacy that takes place in Washington almost daily basis.
I think it's certainly educational. It's certainly worth doing. And the best argument we can make for getting rid of the tax code is showing people what's in it. But I got kind of a gentle nudge a couple of weeks ago, and I think Ron is nudging me from the great beyond up here and saying, "Don't spend so much time on it." Okay, so I will try to be a bit more precise and a bit more concise when going through congress.gov. But this week is actually going to be pretty easy to do that because there's not as much meaty new stuff out there as there has been in past weeks. But let's start my timer and see how much time I got. Okay, and we will start off today with HR 1743 to amend the Internal Revenue Code of 1986 to repeal fossil fuel subsidies for oil companies, to establish gas price rebates for individuals for 2022 and for other purposes. You don't think that has a political agenda behind it, do you?
I can't imagine that it would. It doesn't sound like. Just kidding. And the thing is we're going to need fuel. We're going to need petroleum. Petroleum products make this. They make my glasses. They make, the bottled plastic, and that kind of thing. I don't know how folks think we're going to turn a corner and get to sustainable energy resources in an overnight fashion. And we know overnight in this case means, a decade or two. And I know you're all about wind and solar and all that. I think it's great that we can, do that. Heck, if I could hook up a gerbil to one of those cages like that and put a generator on the side of it, I think that would work too. But
we got lots of solar energy down here in Florida.
Sure, lots.
All right, well, let's move on here. This is HR 1732 is the next one on the list today. And remember we talked to Professor Kendall, an economics professor, a while back. And one of the things he said, one of the problems with an income tax is defining what income is. And right. That sounds kind of facetious on the surface, but it's true. And HR 1732 here says to amend the Internal Revenue Code to exclude from gross income, in other words, this does not count as income, the basic needs allowance for members of the armed forces. A noble goal for sure, but you're picking winners and losers, and you can't define what income is if you keep giving these kind of exemptions and exceptions.
Right, and there's a form for all of that. And you can find out what it is in publication 17. But you see, like there's you, there's me, there's the guy over there, there's the group of people down there, and everybody ends up in a box that gets some sort of credit or incentive or disincentive provided in the tax code. And it's just not, it's not the fair tax. Hey, how'd you like that transition? It's not not the fair tax, which is a tax on consumption. Everybody goes to buy groceries. Everybody buys, stuff, clothes, education we're going to pay. There are a lot of benefits to a tax on consumption that aren't necessarily talked about within the conversations that people have about switching from income to the fair tax, for example, income tax versus fair tax. So that's hopefully, something that we'll be able to accelerate in terms of debate between now and whatever time the whole program of HR 25 gets on the floor of the House later this year.
All right. Well, this one looks familiar. This is actually something I remember talking with Ron about. So this is one just keeps coming back and coming back and coming back. I think we put this one in the Hall of Shame the first year that we saw it. HR 1685 to amend the Internal Revenue Code to provide a credit for the purchase of certain new electric bicycles.
E-bikes,
the new electric bicycles. And I remember when we first saw that, we looked at those things aren't cheap. And
No,
there's a companion Senate bill, S-881, that does the same thing. But you can get a credit for purchasing certain new electric bicycles if HR 1685 and S-881 get through.
and
So, okay.
does the e-bike become a motorcycle? That's my question. I guess it's, if gasoline powered motorcycles are moving in a transitory direction towards an electric motorcycle, at what point does the e-bike compete with the electric motorcycle?
I
Because
don't know. I saw something. I follow NASCAR pretty good, and I saw one of their posts think that General Motors Chevrolet is going to discontinue producing the Camaro, which has been a muscle car icon for decades. And down in the article it says if it ever comes back, it'll probably come back as an electric car. Now, can you imagine an electric Camaro racing on NASCAR? That's
a lot of the vehicle manufacturers are doing the same thing. Jeep just announced the Cherokee line is ending at the end of 2024, and if it does come back, it might be an electric type deal.
yeah.
It's happening in all of the manufacturers, but the Camaro, the muscle cars, that was resurrected from years ago. Even the Dodge Charger and the Challenger were all brought back. Now these vehicles are Hemi powered V8s, etc., and they're not necessarily going to fit into a box that requires less and less use of fuel in terms of powering the vehicle.
Okay, well, see what kind of weeds we can get into when we start talking about electric bicycles. But there we go. All right, I've been as concise as I can this week on FAIRtax Power Radio with our Congress.gov segment. Again, what we do, we put Internal Revenue Code, those are words in quotes at the top of the search bar at the page, and hit the go button. And as of the date we're recording this, we get 280 hits on that search, which is kind of cool. All right, but let's how'd I do on time today? I think we might have done better. Let's move on to what we were going to be the meat and potatoes of this FAIRtax Power Radio episode. Again, the fair tax is good for the economy, and there is a lot of research material in the fairtax.org research library on this. Again, we touched on some of it when we were doing our rest of the story, I think, but there was another one in there that I really want to touch to, and I will note up front that in fact, all of these economic studies that we're looking for are kind of outdated. There's one from Arduin, Laffer and Moore econometrics. That's the one I really want to kind of look at some pieces of. That one actually came out in 2006, I do believe. But it's been around a while. And one of the things that Americans for Fair Taxation needs to do, you kind of don't want to get on here and beg for money all the time. But AFFT, Americans for Fair Taxation, the National Fair Tax Group, is wanting to update some of these economic studies. Now, I don't think the main things are going to. Some of the numbers may change a little bit, but the main thrust of it is really not going to change when it says the fair tax is a great thing to have. But if you'd like to join the 1040 Club, invest $10.40 a month in helping AFFT update some of these studies, that would be pretty cool. But let's move this on. Arduin, Laffer and Moore. Now, the name Laffer, sounded a little bit familiar. And yes, that is Art Laffer. We're going to get into one of his little famous theories in here a little bit later. But to start off with, this thing is a 41-page document. But I love the intro to this thing, a macroeconomics analysis of the fair tax proposal. And they start this thing off by saying incentives drive all economic behavior, and taxes are a negative incentive. People don't work, invest, or engage in entrepreneurial activities in order to pay taxes. They engage in those things in order to earn after-tax income. And when the government increases its share of the income earned by citizens, the incentive to engage in growth-enhancing economic activity falls. Alternatively, the disincentive to these activities rise. The higher the tax on the next dollar earned, i.e. the marginal tax rate, the larger the disincentive. However, without taxes, the government can't operate. So from an economic efficiency perspective, the appropriate goal for tax policy is to establish a tax system that minimizes the tax disincentives on economic activity and still raises the revenue that the government needs. So that's what this is operating on.
Right. That's great. Yeah. there are costs involved in any tax system.
Yeah.
Current tax is an absolute failure, and this is taking information from the report that we are talking about here, which is available on the fairtax.org webpage. First, the compliance costs are too large. So says the study. Studies estimate the cost of compliance with the current tax system to be around $200 billion annually. I'll say that again. Studies estimate the cost of compliance with the current tax system to be around $200 billion annually.
Yeah, and again, that was in 2006. That number is a lot bigger today.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other cool thing about this, and I'll let you get back into the weeds on this, is that they are actually putting this report together, and you'll see it when you go to look at it. The group is putting this report together and giving the sources for their findings and their analytical responses within the confines of this report.
Well, what I want to skip down to the next point in this study that I want to look at, we hear a lot of people say, well, of course, they changed the 23% rate to 30%, so they change it from inclusive to exclusive, expression. But the next question that the study wanted to look at is whether or not the 23% consumption tax rate is high enough to be revenue neutral. You hear voices out there all the time, oh, 23% isn't nowhere near enough. It's going to have to be 50 or 60%. They don't support what they're saying, but they'll tell you that. And it was interesting that they did address that issue in this study. And it was saying the revenues from the income tax. And again, these figures are quite old. This was from 2004. And I'm not going to go into the actual details of it, but it has a table in here that shows that the taxes that the fair tax is going to replace would generated in 2004 $1,756.6 billion. Remember that, 1,756.6. And then which accounted for about 93.4% of all the money that the government took in. So instead of 1756.6, and you scoot down to the fair tax, they would say that the fair tax would bring in a gross revenue of $2,308.79 billion, but you have to subtract out of that the cost of the prebate, and that would be 446.14 billion. So the bottom line was that the taxes that the fair tax are replacing is going to bring in 1,756.6. The fair tax would bring in 1,862.65, and that's at the 23% rate. So folks that are saying 23% is not near enough are just don't know what they're talking about, because these learned economists say 23% would actually raise more than the income tax raises at that point.
Yeah, but also because there's more people, there's a bigger pot of consumers than there are people paying taxes. So that regardless of how the rate differential is, you still are going to have more people at the cash register paying in to the federal treasury than there are now under the current income tax.
Okay, and remember the name Art Laffer, which is part of the firm that did this study. He came up with that famous Laffer curve. You know what that is?
Yes.
It applies to price points to begin with, and says there is a price point for every product out there that will maximize return for the seller. For example, if you're selling bottles of Cheerwine here. If you sell them for a penny, you'll sell a whole lot of bottles, but you're not going to make much money because your price is too low. But you can't turn that around and say, okay, well, I'll just sell these for $100 a can and make all that money. No, if you sell them for $100 a can, you'll make nothing because nobody is going to buy one at that price. Right. So between a penny and $100 is a particular price point that maximizes the return back to the seller. If you go above that, you're actually hurting yourself. And that applies to tax rates as well. People talk about these tax rates are going to go out of sight. Well, no, because if you raise taxes above a particular point, then you start diminishing your return because you're, disincentivizing the kind of activity that is taxed.
The activity that's taxed is basically going to diminish. The activity is going to be diminished there, and government revenues are not always raised when the marginal tax rate is increased at some level. Folks are going to fail their activity that would put them in the path of being taxed.
Mm-hmm. Well, as unless it's buried somewhere in this thing and I couldn't find it, they didn't really say what is that tax rate point that you really can't go above before you start hurting yourself. But again, you hear people say, well, these tax rates are going to go through the roof because the government can't stop taxing, can't raise taxes. They're saying, well, politicians are much more prone to raise taxes in bad times than they are to cut taxes in good times. But there is this just economic law that says you cannot raise your rates above a particular level, or you're actually going to start hurting your revenue collection.
And we've seen that happen every time there's increases or decreases in the marginal tax rate. No matter where you're at, back in the 80s, early 80s, it was what, 70 something. I mean, it was some astronomical number. And President Reagan brought that number through acts of Congress down to something a little more manageable. And the revenues after that actually increased. The fair tax cuts the marginal tax rate on income to zero, providing strong growth and enhancing incentives throughout the economy. And the government is going to be on the positive end of that by being able to share in the beneficial growth impacts, according to the study that we're reading from here today.
And again, if you'd like to read this in entirety, if you just really like wonky articles that really, and I mean, this one really gets into the weeds, you can go to the research library. You may have to go, if I'm not mistaken, they took the research tab off of the fairtax.org menu. So you may have to Google FAIRtax research, and you'll find it for sure. But this is the Arduin, Laffer and Moore 2006 study. And it's got all kinds. One of the things it does say down here is that, calculating tax rates sounds like it's pretty straightforward, but it's not. It's illustrated by the fact the Internal Revenue Service's statistics on incomes calculates average tax rates as a percentage of several different measures of income. You go to gross income, you go to taxable income, you got to do, as we saw earlier in Congress.gov, it's kind of hard to determine what income is. So it's not all that easy to figure out what the tax rate is.
I mean, and again, you got a box of incentives over here, then you got a disincentive here. And if you're over here, if you're in this country, or part of the country, if you're over here doing a certain activity, then you may get a benefit. If you're, what was Stabenow's proposal?
Chancellor Stabenow wants to change the definition of municipal solid waste. I haven't seen that in this Congress yet, but it'll go back in the Hall of Shame when it does.
You're involved in that, you're going to get another tax rate. I love this particular paragraph in the document that we're studying today. The dynamic, and this is where you really get down into the bottom layer, the dynamic macroeconomic benefit of the fair tax for the labor market is created by removing the tax wedge. Removing the tax wedge creates beneficial impacts on wages and employment levels and enhances overall work incentives throughout the economy by removing inefficiencies in economic allocation.
Oh, you really dug deep with your weed puller on that one, didn't you?
I'm sitting here going, okay, I can almost get this. I had an economics class in college, and I remember a lot of this stuff, and it's like all coming back to the top of my head now. And yes, it is wonky, but let me tell you, the positive impact that the fair tax will have on the economy is in this report. For all 41 pages of it, including some pretty cool algebraic equations that I'm not even going to be able to figure out at the last part here today.
Okay, well, I scroll down to page 19 here. There's a table there that shows, in effect, under the current system, how much our corporations get to keep of every dollar they earned. And I guess they got really wonky with this one too, as far as the figures that they were coming up with. But they were saying that for every, let's see, scroll that up just a hair, for every $129.18 of before tax corporate income after they paid their corporate taxes and then their taxes on their dividends and taxes on capital gains and stuff, the company will get to keep $89.65. In other words, you get under the current income tax system, a corporate earning, and I'm sure this is an average, it would vary from corporation to corporation, but on average, you get to keep about 2/3 of what you make. Under the fair tax, you get to keep it all.
Right. That's right. And the benefit too to the shareholders is there's no tax on those dividends that come in, and you can save it without being taxed. And you can spend it. That's the only time that you're going to get a tax is when you release some of that money to exchange it for something else that you have a better desire for than keeping the money.
Okay, there's a footnote here on this page. It says economists generally agree that although corporations pay taxes, they don't bear the brunt of those taxes. Instead, all taxes are passed through either to consumers, workers, or the owners of the firms or shareholders. We've been preaching that gospel for a long time here, and people just don't seem to get it. Let's raise taxes on corporations so they'll have to pay their fair share. No, they just raise their price to everyone else when that happens, and this study recognizes that.
Right, and their benefit, the company is in business to provide a service or a product, but they're also, and they have shareholders to provide a good return for those shareholders. And all shareholders aren't going to necessarily benefit because of an increase in taxes. Then they might decide to take their money out of that company and go somewhere else with that investment.
Well, I say that this study, this article we're looking at is 41 pages long, and it's as wonky as it gets if you like to get into this kind of stuff. But we're running kind of short on time here on FairtaX Power Radio. So let me skip down to the end of it, page 36, conclusion. I love this. Our current tax system is most aptly described as an inefficient, hybrid income consumption-based tax system. It is rife with problems. The current tax system is overly complex, it's costly to administer, creates adverse incentives, and is plagued with loopholes and random exemptions. Additionally, many of the taxes currently imposed are hidden, obfuscating the system's true tax burden from taxpayers. As a consequence, the current tax system sacrifices potential U.S. economic growth. The fair tax offers a simple, revenue-neutral alternative to the current tax system. As currently proposed, and the current proposal in this Congress is still pretty much the same one that was in Congress when this study was written. It says the fair tax is a pure consumption tax that is not hidden in the price of products. It's visible for all to see. It will result in higher total economic output, more savings, higher take-home pay for workers, faster employment growth, greater rewards to investing that directly lead to more capital formation, lower mortgage rates, consequently beneficial impacts for the housing market, and a more efficient and stable tax revenue system. For all of these reasons, the fair tax has a great deal to offer as a proposed tax replacement system and is a marked improvement over the current tax regime. Amen, fellas, you did a good job.
And this is available. And again, what Bob said a minute ago is you may need to search FairtaX and remember the group Arduin, Laffer, Laffer, and Moore econometrics. If you remember that, you can make your way to your favorite search engine and find reports. And I think we'd probably be okay with sending them to people if they emailed us. We'd be glad to load up an email and send you these reports.
The FAIRtax Guys at gmail.com, or you can leave a comment on any of the videos on our YouTube channel. Of course, they're streamed live on the FairtaX official Facebook page. We're also on Rumble, and we certainly invite people to send comments. I'd like to know whether you like the Congress.gov segment. There's another weed we can get into.
Let me tell you, though, it's a good thing to have because it gives us an extra show at the end of the year, every year, with the Hall of Shame. If we
I do enjoy compiling the Hall of Shame. That's incredibly fun.
It's fantastic. The fair tax is the release of an economic boom like no one has ever seen. It will absolutely change everyone's outlook on life. the pressure taken off just by not having to deal with the compliance of the income tax. It will unleash business, entrepreneurial innovation and creativity, and put us at the top of the innovation heap of the world competition. If we can pull it off, and I think we can. There's a lot of, like Bob said at the beginning of the program, a lot of people are stepping up to be on our side with regard to the promotion of, through the advisory board, the promotion of the fair tax. Thank you to the folks that are serving on that advisory board. I know that we can all get together and make this happen. There's an opportunity within Congress right now. HR 25 is going to be debated on the floor. And so hopefully you folks that are out there watching and listening will be able to help us get over the finish line this year.
Indeed, if you can invest a little bit of the grimy green stuff in helping AFFT update these economic studies. I say this one was in 2006. We're going to look at another one next week on FairtaX Power Radio. It's from 2007. And I think the principle is still valid, but we'd like to update these things with some more current numbers. And you can go to fairtax.org and join the 1040 Club. That's contributing just $10.40 a month, which is next to nothing out of most people's budget. And it would, if we can get a lot of people doing that, then we won't need to go find these mega millions and high dollar donors that would be nice to have. But anyhow, that's all the time we've got here on this edition of FairtaX Power Radio. Thank you so much for watching and listening and sharing this video. I'm Bob Paxton.
I'm Bob Scarborough.
Again, we are the FairtaX Guys, reminding you the fair tax is the only truly fair tax, and once you understand it,
you'll demand it.
So what would you do for her?
We've got several programs that will help her. We just need to find out how much she makes. But the good news is, the less she does, the more we can help.
Yeah.
If I may, with the fair tax, we wouldn't even tax her income. So the more she makes, the more she has.
But still, a consumption tax could eat up a lot of her income.
Which is why at the beginning of every month, we're actually going to give back all that she pays in taxes on basic necessities.
You're going to give her back her taxes?
Every month. On everything taxed on basic necessities. But we're also going to give it back to you and to every American citizen.
Why?
Well, we believe taxes should be fair.